In a world where circular saw crosscut jigs are the most awesome thing ever, join this epic adventure and find out how to make your own in How to Build a Circular Saw Crosscut Jig, starring Dan Pattison as that shop-made efficiency solutions woodworking guy. If you enjoyed the original circular saw crosscut jig, accurate and dustless, then you'll find the sequel informative and thrilling. Rolling Blades gives it 2 thumbs up. Rated PG.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of DP Shop Talk. And today we're going to be taking a look at how to build my circular saw crosscut jig. Now this is a follow-up video by popular request to the original video I did on what the jig is and how it works. There's been a lot of interest in how to actually construct it. So this is the how-to video showing how to actually make it. So the dimensions of the jig will vary depending on the saw that you have and the size of the material that you want to cut. So I won't go into too many specific dimensions, but I'll go through how it's constructed, the process that I use to make it, as well as some general tips on how to size it for your saw. So now it's time to embark on this epic adventure. First thing to start with is the base plate for the jig. Now it's basically just a T-shape, as you can see from the bottom here, pretty simple. When I made it, I used my track saw and just cut in as far as I could from each direction, and then finished into the corners with the jigsaw to complete the cut, and just made it at a 3/4 inch plywood, so it's pretty basic. Now the dimensions that you want to consider here are the overall support length that you want for your workpiece, the maximum width of cut that you want. I mean, you can make this as wide or as narrow as you want depending on what your requirements are. How wide you need the top plate to be for your specific saw, if it has a wider base or a narrower base, whatever suits your saw. And then also how far forward your saw needs to go to complete the cut through the fence, and how far back your saw needs to come to be clear of the workpiece to start the cut. So, like I said, those dimensions really depend on the kind of work that you do and the saw that you have. Now, one thing to bear in mind, like I went with 24 inches overall for the length, 6.5 inch maximum cut width, about 9 inches width on the wings once you take the fence into account and the box at the back. That gives you 6.5 inch maximum cut width. So I didn't want to make the jig too big. In some ways that would be nice because then you got more capacity, but then it makes it harder to transport. And kind of the whole idea behind this is it's light, small, and easy to take with you, so I didn't want to make it too big. Now if it's a permanent fixture in your shop, then go ahead and make it as big as you want, and then it really doesn't matter. So again, it really depends on your purposes for the jig. So the next components of the jig are the riser boxes and the top plate. So the riser boxes, there's a 3-sided box at the front of the jig that is open on the front for the fence to pass through. So it's basically just the front and the 2 sides. And then the riser box on the back is 4-sided, so it goes all the way around, and the blade passes through the front piece of the box. But other than that, it's all enclosed. So the riser boxes are just made out of 3/4 inch plywood, and I just glued and brad nailed them together, and then glued and bradded them to the base plate. So they're very, very basic in their construction, but yet plenty strong. Now I'll talk more about the height of the riser blocks in just a minute. The next component being the top plate, that's a piece of 1/2 inch Baltic birch. And it's also glued and bradded down to the riser boxes. Now there's a notch in the top, or in the top plate itself, so that needs to be wide enough for the blade to pass through, but yet narrow enough to catch the front of the saw guard, so that when the saw sits in the jig, the edge of the guard just catches on this inner edge of the notch, and what that does is keeps the guard out of the way as you slide the saw back and forth, so it doesn't interfere with your cut or your sight line. Now, one thing to note about that, you want it to come back far enough that your blade has plenty of clearance when the saw is at the back of the jig. But at the front of the jig, I originally brought the notch up to here, but I found that the dust would kind of spit up and escape from that bigger notch in the front. So I added a filler plate that actually gets saw kerf in it when you run the saw through it the first time. And that really helps contain any extra dust within the box in the front. So if I was to do this over again, I would have just brought this notch just to the front of the fence basically, and not extended it all the way in. So you can learn from my mistake there. And if you're building one, make sure that you stop that notch short. Now, the height of the riser boxes, like I mentioned, depends on the saw that you have. So this is a 6.5 inch saw. So if you have a 7 1/4 or whatever size you have, what you need to do is take your maximum depth of cut that the saw will give you. I have it set at the maximum depth of cut right now, and factor in your 1/2 inch plywood. And I made sure that the teeth go into the base plate by 5/16 of an inch. So what that does is it avoids the teeth dragging on the edge of the workpiece and causing tear out. So basically you take that 1/2 inch into account, the 5/16 or whatever suits your blade, and then that will give you the height of your riser boxes. So the next components to make, and these components should be added before you put the top plate on the riser boxes, is the UHMW strips. Like I mentioned in the last video, I used UHMW, or ultra high molecular weight plastic, since it's very low friction, so it makes the saw glide nice and easily. So these two outer strips, they project about a 32nd of an inch above the surface of the top plate, so that the saw doesn't even touch the plywood, it just rides right on top of these. And then the inner strip projects about a 1/4 inch above the surface, and that fits into this groove that's in the bottom of the saw. So it's sized perfectly so that it fits in, so there's no slop, but yet it still rides nice and freely and moves nice. So you need to kind of just creep in on that fit to get it exactly what you want it to be. So all three strips are dadoed into the top plate, and I just made the dados about 3/16 of an inch deep, and then the strips get secured down with 23 gauge pins into the dados that were made. Now, if your saw doesn't have a groove in the base, what I would do is skip this inner strip, and then these two outer strips, make them taller, and then obviously spread apart, so you're going to have to make the top plate a little bit wider, and make those so that it kind of captures your saw base between the two, so that your saw just runs between the two rails rather than running on one central rail. So it really depends on which saw you have and whether or not you have that groove feature in the base plate. So the final component of the jig is the fence. I just used a piece of straight grain maple and jointed it to make sure it was perfectly straight and flat, so it was nice and accurate. So before you actually attach your fence, what you need to do is make the initial cut in the base plate of the jig. So to do that, what I did is registered the saw onto the runner, and then you have to actually lower the saw down and make a plunge cut to go into the base and run it back and forth to make sure you get your full length kerf in there. So once you have that kerf set, then you can attach the fence at one end with a screw, and then take a square and just as close as you can square up the fence to that kerf line, and then clamp the opposite end of the fence down, and then go ahead and make some test cuts on some scrap wood until you get it bang on, so that that your cut is exactly square. So once you're happy with it, then it's just a matter of adding some more screws along the length to fully secure the fence down, and then you know that your cuts are going to be dead on. Now, one note about the fence: when you're making it, I put a little shallow rabbet in the front bottom edge there, just to allow for any dust buildup so that it doesn't space your workpiece out from the fence and throw off the accuracy of your cut. So that's a good idea to add to any fence, whether it's a crosscut sled for a table saw or something like this. The other thing that I added once the fence was attached is just some pieces of foam to close in the gap between the fence and the front riser box, and the fence and the top plate, and that just helps with the dust collection. I did that on each side, and that helps any dust that spits into the front box. It keeps it from coming out the sides. So that's just a small dust collection improvement that you can make as well. So I hope that you found this epic adventure was helpful in creating your own circular saw crosscut jig for whatever saw you happen to have. Now, I didn't go into any detail about how to make the dust collection attachment, since that's very specific to this model of Bosch saw that I have. So if you have this saw and you'd really like to see the details on how I made that, let me know in the comments below, and I can make another video on just that dust collection attachment. Now, whatever saw you have, you're basically just trying to create as much of an enclosure as possible around the front of the blade to get that dust at the source, and then just adding on a port that's compatible with the size of your dust extraction hose. So there's really not a lot to it, and I know that you guys are a creative bunch. Woodworkers are just naturally creative, so I'm sure that you guys are able to come up with something for your specific saw. So as I mentioned, if you haven't seen the original video on what the jig is and how it works, make sure you check that out as well. Now again, I hope you found this video helpful. If you have, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, make sure you leave your ideas, questions, and what's worked for you in the comments below. Let's get some shop talk going about crosscut jigs and crosscut methods in general. Let me know what works for you, and if you create your own version of this jig, I'd love to see some pictures of it as well. So thanks for watching, and until next time, let's talk shop.